When was the last time you saw a crowd gathering just to watch a McDonald's opening? I bet never. It was nothing special for US people, just another fast food restaurant. But for the Soviet people, it was a change in the society, something completely new. January 31st, 1990, Moscow. A record-breaking 3,000 people stand in line, waiting hours to taste their first ever Big Mac. But this wasn't just about food. This was a moment of change, a glimpse into a different world. For decades, Soviet citizens lived with rationing, empty shelves, and endless lines. Then suddenly, a Western company arrived, offering something their own system never could. And many still ask today, did McDonald's actually help collapse the USSR? Was this the moment capitalism won? Well, opinions may vary, but it definitely helped shape a completely different perspective in the minds of Soviet people. So, how many Big Macs could a Soviet engineer afford? And why wasn't there a Big Tasty in Soviet McDonald's? In reality, the history of Russian fast food began even earlier. In 1988, when Soviet Finnish Polar Kiosk appeared on the streets of Leningrad. They sold the same hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and even French fries, but there was no special excitement. It was the same USSR style. The opening of the first McDonald's, on the other hand, had the effect of a bomb exploding. Eyewitnesses recalled the monstrous lines where people were ready to wait for hours. But let's start with a brief history of the Soviet Union. I know that many people are familiar with it, but many are not. So let's recap very quickly. The Soviet Union was a state that included 15 countries bordering Russia: Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, and many others. This country was completely closed off. There was a real iron curtain. People didn't know what was happening outside the USSR, as all media was controlled by the government. Everything from the outside world was considered illegal. You could even end up in jail for owning a pair of Levi's jeans. People also weren't allowed to travel abroad. Those who were lucky enough to get approval for a trip had to go through numerous bureaucratic obstacles, passing through multiple authorities and getting dozens of documents signed. Even then, they could only travel in special groups, always accompanied by special trained communist overseers who closely monitored and took notes on each group member's behavior. By the mid-80s, rationing was introduced in some regions. Store shelves became increasingly empty, and people had to wait in long lines for essential products such as soap, meat, milk, and even bread. The lines became so common that people would stand in them without even knowing what they were for. They simply knew that wherever there was a line, there were products to be had. Now imagine, it's 1990, and you're living in that era where you can't buy anything. Western products and goods are being smuggled into the country, and to get what you need, you have to visit black markets. Then, you hear the news that a Western company, one of the biggest fast food chains in the world, is about to open its doors in the very center of the USSR. You've heard from your comrades that in the West, they never run out of food or products, and for the first time in your life, you might actually have a choice, whether you want a Big Mac or just a simple bag of fries. Even with that huge line, the desire to catch the glimpse of the Western culture was strong, something you had only seen on TV through propaganda scripts. So McDonald's opened its doors, and people didn't even care that a burger cost them 3 rubles. They were willing to sacrifice their monthly transportation pass just to get a taste of West. If the sources are correct, the average salary in 1990 in the USSR was around 160 rubles a month, which is equivalent to around $450 in today's value. Which is not bad, but definitely not enough, considering that just a TV costed like 1,000 rubles. So, with a monthly salary of 160 rubles, eating at McDonald's often wasn't cheap for an average Soviet citizen, considering that bread was only 20 kopeki, well, around 20 cents, and a kilogram of meat was around 3 rubles, the exact price of a Big Mac. Some people earn only 120 rubles per month, but even they didn't mind spending their salaries at McDonald's. Many had been saving up just to visit the restaurant, just to see what American burgers were all about. This McDonald's was built on Pushkin Square, and it still existed in Moscow up until the Russian-Ukrainian War. It is now Vkusna и точка. After sanctions were imposed on Russia, many say they miss the good old McDonald's. Well, because even though it was a fast and processed food, at least it had high-quality control. But let's step back for a moment, right before this event. Did you know that this opening actually took around 14 years and was only possible because of one man's persistence? He truly believed in the Soviet people even more than Gorbachev did. The franchise was brought to the USSR in 1990 by Canadians, not Americans. George Cohan, the then director of McDonald's Canada, spent 14 years trying to open a restaurant in Moscow. The story began during the Montreal Olympics in 1976, when Cohan accidentally met the Soviet delegation and impressed them endlessly with his business card in the shape of hamburger. By the time, Pepsi had already been sold in the USSR for 4 years. And the Canadian businessman thought that Big Macs and fries also had a chance. The Soviet Union was preparing to host the 1980 Summer Olympics and was not against opening a restaurant. Hundreds of thousands of guests needed to be fed somehow. But after 3 years of negotiations, the contract was never signed. Soviet authorities only approved the opening of the first McDonald's in Moscow in 1987. There were no issues with finding a location. The franchise was given a former Lira restaurant in central Moscow, but problems with ingredients arose immediately. Soviet McDonald's did not sell Big Tasty. Unlike other burgers, it contained slices of tomatoes. But no one in the USSR could provide a year-round supply of tomatoes. Apples for the pies had to be imported from Bulgaria. Since Soviet potatoes were not large enough, Belgium came to the rescue. Even cows of the right meat breed were especially bred for McDonald's. The Canadians spent $50 million to build a huge processing plant where ingredients were turned into semi-finished products, ensuring quality. Specially hired employees measured the length of the fries with a ruler and used a compass to ensure that the buns were perfectly round. While the factory was being built, future Soviet McDonald's employees learned to assemble hamburgers using cardboards and dishwashing sponges. A potential problem was the Soviet service culture, which was not known for being particularly polite to customers.
Been taught to smile relentlessly, all the time.
I smile to anybody and they say, "Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? I wonder what has happened. Why do you smile?" They think that I'm laughing at them.
However, when Cohan was asked if he was afraid that Western business would fail due to Soviet workers, he answered, "Who has won the most Olympic medals? If Soviet youth constantly beats Americans and Canadians in sports, then they can certainly learn to serve food at a high level." If you think working at McDonald's was just a low-end job, for Soviet people it was actually a dream job. Before the first McDonald's opened, they posted job ads in Moscow newspapers. For a 630-seat restaurant, over 25,000 people applied. The guaranteed wage was 2 rubles per hour, and the work was in shifts. Many applicants had already graduated from prestigious universities and spoke foreign languages. The company focused on hiring intellectually gifted youth. Since the average salary was 160 rubles, McDonald's was actually a great-paying job, so it was an incredible job opportunity for Soviet people. The kindness of McDonald's employees was also a novelty for customers accustomed to Soviet-style road service.
Потрясает здесь вот эта вся чистота, красота. И чувствуется, как будто ты вот где-то в другом городе.
Люди хорошие, продавцы не ругаются, не кричат. Спасибо, пожалуйста. И добрые все, улыбающиеся. Приятно просто ходить, даже не для того, чтобы купить, а просто смотреть приятно.
However, not everyone trusted the cashier's smiles. People felt uneasy, thinking, what if they are just laughing at us?
Но мне не понравилось.
I don't like it at all, he says. It's not Russian.
So, McDonald's representatives studied the psychology of their new clientele. As a result, they concluded that smiling was not common in Soviet service culture. Employees were allowed to reduce their level of friendliness and maintain a neutral facial expression. Soon, sales dynamics actually improved, but over time, even tough Russians got used to polite service. Even though McDonald's didn't directly influence the collapse of the USSR, it definitely gave people another reason to question their government. Let me know in the comments if you would want to be on that street in Moscow in 1992, actually enjoy McDonald's culture. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel more than you know. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Natasha and see you tomorrow.